so sick of reality TV.
Good morning, everybody. It's Rita Smith, the #1 food fairy. Really excited this morning because I am going to videotape the process I use to make strawberry jam. It's not a new process. It's been around for hundreds of years. It just gets better every year with the better products and better technologies and better strains of strawberries. These ones are apparently the reddest ones you can buy. I found out yesterday. But it's such a great summer hobby. It tastes fantastic now. The berries are fantastic now. They don't get any better. Berries are fantastic. The products and the technologies, the jars for canning. My mom used to make jam and pour paraffin wax over the top of it. It kept all year. We are doing a lot better now with Bernardin jars and rings and Golden Harvest jars and rings. And we're lucky in Ontario. It doesn't take very much effort, a little bit of money to save the bounty for the whole entire year. Makes great Christmas presents. They freeze beautifully for fruit salads and recipes in the winter. So it's just a great time of year to take advantage of living in Ontario. And I'm going to move forward. There's a few steps here, and there's also a little bit of technical information I want to give you. So let's get started with strawberry jam with Ontario strawberries, and they're going to be fantastic. Now, when you buy a brand new box of jars, these are Golden Harvest. They come from Markham, Ontario, and they're very good, and they're a little bit cheaper than Bernardin, about 2/3 or 3/4 the price. When I can get them, I do. Canadian Tire carries them, as well as everything from Bernardin. When you buy a case of jars, they come with a lid and a ring, okay? So the first time you make something with a brand new case of jars, they will come with a lid and a ring. You don't need to worry about replenishing those. But the whole point of mason jars is that you reuse them, and reuse them, or give them away. And then all your friends return them to you in a bag in a hopes that you will refill them again. I have that happen every year. People say, if I bring you back your jars, will you fill them up for me again? And usually we can work something out. So when you buy a new case of jars, they come with lids and rings. When you're reusing, your Old Faithfuls, year after year, you're going to need to replace the rings for sure. Absolutely, for sure. Oftentimes, not often, every now and then, you'll come across lids that have rusted in the fridge or have dented while you're opening them, and you can't use a rusted or dented ring to seal the jar. It won't catch the rubber all the way around and seal it as it should properly be sealed, and then bacteria could grow in your food. So you've got to have perfectly new lids and perfect condition rings in order to ensure the best seal possible for your processed food. Now, should you over time need to pitch the rings because they got dented or rusted or whatever, or they just traveled with the jars, you can buy a box of just lids and rings. You can also buy a box of just lids. You can buy the case that comes, the jars that come with the lids and the rings. But as you roll along and you start to collect up jars, you're just going to need to replace the lids and rings, okay? So these are about $4, and I think these are about $2. And a case of jars should run around $8 or $9 for the little ones, okay? So there you go. Lids and rings, new lids every single time you process. New rings when the old ones get beat up and no longer able to protect the seal on the jar, and then we get to the jars, which are pretty. I'd like to say standard. It's a fantastic life simplifier to only use mason jars because all the lids always fit, and you don't have a drawer or a cupboard full of odds and sods pieces of jar. It came off a pickle jar, it came off a mayonnaise jar, it came off a spice jar, but they don't fit each other, and even within one brand, different sizes won't fit each other. No matter what size of a mason jar you're using, the neck is always going to be the same. It's either going to be standard or it's going to be wide mouth. That's it. It's a great life simplifier, which the people who shoot life hacks and stuff have figured out, because now they've got ideas to use mason jars for this, store buttons, store pennies, store whatever. And that is because they are so super convenient, because there's only two neck sizes, standard and wide mouth, and the rings will always fit that size of a jar from any manufacturer, which is pretty awesomely cool in a world where everything is changing all the time. Okay, so we've got our jars. These are not just a jar. Hush! These are not just a jar that similar to what you would buy at the grocery store, spaghetti sauce, let's say, with a metal lid. Bring it home and you can can in that jar. No, you need the mason jar, you need the standardized lid, the ring with the rubber coating, which is what catches and seals the jar. You can boil them. You can also freeze them if you don't fill them too full. I tend not to do that because I still have freezer accidents. But they're tempered glass. They can withstand the heat. They're not the same as what you would just bring home from the grocery store with any kind of food in it. They are a special animal, and not any more expensive though. Just standardized and toughened up to stand being processed and boiled. Okay, so that's the lids and the jars, and once you've invested in them and you keep filling them, so long as you're not giving them away, or you give them away and people bring them back to you, it becomes a very inexpensive proposition. And as a matter of fact, my kids love the fact that every Christmas, the first two things on my list are 250 standard mouth jars and 500 ml wide mouth jars for jams and pickles. They would love to buy me some and wrap a big box of them at Christmas. Looks great under the tree. Cost them less than $10. So I get some jars pretty much every Christmas now, and they like to know what to buy me, and I like to have the jars. So I don't really spend that much money on jars. You won't need to either once you get rolling. To get started, maybe, but not once you get rolling. So pans, no matter how you slice it, you're going to need at least 3 pans. The smallest one, I've been using this one for years and years, and I think it's got ring marks on the bottom of it. The smallest one, you're going to put your lids and rings in here to soften the rubber on the ring, okay? So I can fit a dozen, I think, at a time in here. You put them in the pan. I try to keep them together when I can, but it's not necessary. Put them in the pan, fill the pan about 2/3 of the way with water, and just keep it warm to hot, simmering on the back. You don't need to boil the lids, and in fact, by boiling them, you could actually wear away the rubber. You don't necessarily want to do that. But it should be, just below a simmer, nice and hot, to soften the rubber. This isn't like a sterilizing practice or anything, although it does clean the lids. But it is to soften the rubber so that when you put it on the jar, it will be able to form a seal. And I'll show you how that works momentarily. So you need a smaller pan to put your jar lids in. You need a medium-sized pan in which to cook the jam. I'm doing like fairly industrial loads of jam today, so I'm going to use a big pan, but you could use a smaller one than this. It's heavy bottom. It is not aluminum, okay? So I'm using a Paderno triple aluminum ply, which is coated in a stainless steel clad bottom, so that, especially strawberries, you don't want them to be cooking in an aluminum pan. So I'm going to use my medium-sized Paderno Dutch oven with a very thick bottom in which to cook the jam. Okay, a couple of other handy dandy, well, you're going to need a ladle. There's no way around that you're going to need a ladle. I like to use a funnel. Wow, does that ever make life easier? Holy moly. I remember when I used to try to just get the jam in the jars, and then you'd have to wipe every lid because, or every edge of every neck of every jar, because you get jam all over it. But with the funnel, it just goes straight into the jar and there's no wiping required. It really, really speeds things up and makes things easier. Okay. Now, in terms of lifting the jars in and out of the boiling hot water, which is going to be on the in the large pan, I love these. I have 2 of them actually. I used to use just tongs to get the jars in and out, but wow, is this ever better and easier? It's about $7, and it'll prevent a lot of burns from splashing water. I do use the tongs sometimes just to get the inside of the lid out of, if it's floating around the pan, it doesn't come out together. But you need these to get the lids and the rings out of the pan anyway. And this is like a real, wow, I wouldn't go out and buy one of these, but it just kind of fell into my lap. It's a magnet that it'll pick up the jar lid from in the water. So if you have one of these, great. I wouldn't waste any time going out to buy one. I use the tongs for that. But so the smaller Dutch oven is going to be used to, a stainless steel thick core bottom is going to be used to cook the jam, and then to process the jars, I'm going to use my largest Paderno stock pot. You can buy, the black and white or blue and white Fleck. They're not, they don't have a heavy bottom. They're just a canning processing pot with a lid and a rack. I have found that those consistently don't fit the burners of my stove. As a matter of fact, I threw one out in frustration last year. It was so wide and not tall that it was actually, I had one break the burner of my stove. They're an odd size. I don't know, they're made in China or something. They're an odd size. They don't necessarily fit the burner, and you don't need an extra pan. So if you've got a stock pot, use your stock pot. It doesn't even need to be heavy bottom because you're just boiling water. If you've got a big stock pot, use that. You could buy a canning kettle, but, and as a matter of fact, when I'm just doing smaller jars, I can use my smaller Dutch oven. So that I'm not a fan of. I'm not a fan of the specialty pots just for processing jars. I've purchased a few in my life, and I always end up getting rid of them because they don't do the task at hand, or they do it and water's spilling all over the store. I prefer my Paderno pans. So if you don't have to go out and buy one of those, I wouldn't recommend that you do. If you have one, or you got a garage sale or somebody gave it to you as a present, try it out. But I find them to be too low and too wide for the burner of the stove, and they just don't get the job done for me. So I prefer these ones. Before I get started cleaning the fruit, the whole sink full of strawberries there in mortal rinse, I just wanted to call your attention to this magical thing that's inside the box. Whether you buy Certo pectin or whether you buy Bernardin pectin, inside of every box comes the instructions that you are going to need for a variety of fruit jams and jellies, and maybe even not fruit jams and jellies. Okay, French and English, French on one side, English on the other. This is it comes in every box, so you can pitch it. If you buy a box of pectin, you're going to get these instructions, okay? It'll give you cooked jam directions, it'll give you cooked jelly directions, and it'll give you freezer jam directions. I try not to use, I don't use those. Some tips before you begin. They'll tell you what you need. It's way shorter than this video you're watching here, but just the basic tips about washing, sterilizing, and so forth. Okay, so I'm going to the cooked jam directions. And on the one side, it'll give you the fruit, it'll tell you the prep, and it'll tell you the measured ingredients. Okay, so starting with apricot and ending with bumbleberry. Obviously, they're not in alphabetical order. So I'm going to find strawberry. There it is right there. Strawberry, 2 liters, yield 8 250 ml jars. So the measured ingredients are 5 cups of crushed strawberries, which is about a little more than half of this big guy here. 1/4 cup lemon juice, that's optional. 1 package of Certo, and 7 cups of sugar, okay? There's a lot of sugar in jam. 5 cups of fruit, 7 cups of sugar, 1 package of Certo. So I'm gonna get to cleaning strawberries. I'm just gonna, all the instructions say do not double the recipe, do not double the recipe. So I'm gonna repeat, do not double the recipe. I, however, double the recipe. I normally, when I'm cooking, I make 2 at a shot. Just because it's time consuming, and I've never run into trouble doubling the recipe. However, I don't do more than that. I have run into trouble trying to triple or quadruple the recipe. So the most I would recommend is you could probably get away with doubling it if you have a big heavy bottom pan and you move fast. For the purposes of today's demonstration, I'm just going to do one recipe, which is 5 cups of strawberries, 1 box of Certo, 7 cups of sugar, and I might add the lemon juice just because the recipe calls for it, but I don't usually add lemon juice to my strawberry jam. Strawberries are tangy enough, I'll tell you that. Totally tangy enough. Okay, so there's the instruction sheet to look for in every box. You could make cherry jam, have made that, grape jelly, made that, marmalade. I don't know if I've ever made marmalade. Peach or pear jam, fantastic. Raspberry, blackberry, or loganberry. Strawberry, rhubarb. Ooh, I have rhubarb growing. I might do some of that today. And bumbleberry. So over here is jelly. So if you're making like mint jelly or herb jelly or plum jelly, like jelly's a different thing, but you will get all the instructions here that you need. Today we're focused on the jam, cooked jam. So cooked strawberry jam, here it comes. 5 cups strawberries, 7 cups sugar. Away we go. So I have here 5 cups of hulled and crushed strawberries. I should have mentioned when I read the instructions earlier, crushed. The strawberries are rinsed, of course, a lot because there's a lot of sand and still a little bit of straw attached to them as they come in off the farm. So they're very, very thoroughly rinsed. Took a couple of times of emptying the sand out of the sink, actually. Very thoroughly rinsed and crushed, a little bit crushed, so that you get the volume of strawberries that you should have in the pan. It starts off at around 6.5 cups, and you kind of crush it down to 5. Okay, so my 5 cups of hulled and crushed strawberries are in the pan. Also, the recipe calls for lemon juice. I might squirt a little bit of lemon juice in there. I don't know that I need a quarter of a cup or half of a cup, but let's just we'll give a little squirt of lemon juice. The big part of this section of the recipe is the pectin, of course. So I'm going to squirt in a little bit less lemon juice than they call for, but anyway, okay. You don't need the lemon juice. It's optional. It's optional. You don't need the lemon juice. Okay. Now, that is in there. I am going to add all the pectin. Okay, add all the pectin. And then this pan needs to come to a boil before we add the sugar. So we're going to, and it takes a while. You can't do this quickly. So this is going to be on the stove for quite a little while. Which is why I do double batches, but even though they say not to. So we're going to put in all of the pectin. It's got the lemon juice. It's got the strawberries. Now, one thing I do, and this recipe says it's optional, I'm going to do it, is include about a ½ teaspoon of butter. I'll wait till things are heated up before I do that. What the butter does is it keeps down the foam. Recipes that have fruit and a lot of sugar and pectin, all of which kind of promotes bubbles, you'll end up with like a layer of foam across the top of the jam, and when you put it in the jars, it rises to the top. It looks... it might concern people that there's something wrong with the jam. There's nothing wrong with the jam, but you just don't want a layer of foam or scum across the top of the jam. So the butter helps keep that down. So there. Now this is all on. It's on a low temperature. It's at 3. As it starts to warm up, because the strawberries are cold, as it starts to warm up, I might turn the temperature up a little bit, but the strawberries, the Certo, and the lemon juice needs to come to boil. Start popping away before I add the sugar all at once, the 7 cups of sugar. And while this is gently warming up here, I've got my lids are on the back here, warming, so that's going to soften the rubber so the lid will seal to the jar. And then over here I've got 8 jars in my big tall pot full of water. The jars will heat and boil a little bit. Be hot. When you're canning, you want to be putting hot food in hot jars. So the jars are back there heating. I did put a short little rack at the bottom of the pan. For years I didn't use one of those, but it does, the jars do sometimes click against the metal on the bottom of the pan. I've had the odd one break. I think that was more a flaw in the glass than the fact that it was touching the bottom of the pan. But I did put a rack in there. So the jars are sitting up off the bottom of the pan on the rack. They're going to come to a boil. This is going to warm up. The lids are warming. And I've got everything else ready. I cleaned up the kitchen. I wiped down the counters like a surgery. I've got my lifters, my tongs, my scoops. Everything is ready to go because once you start the process of filling the jars, it moves very quickly. And you'll see that when I do it. You want the prepared food to be ready to go into the jars, hot fruit into hot jars, into the can, and start processing in as few seconds or minutes as you can manage to do it, because that just reduces the exposure time for any form of bacteria to settle on the food, or for the water to cool when you don't want it to cool, or whatever. So once you start doing this, you move quickly, and that is why you want to have everything ready. The jam, the jars, the lids, the tools that you need, your hot pads, whatever, a cloth nearby. Have it standing at the ready so that you don't have to stop and look for those things while you're working. All right, the strawberries, the pectin, and the lemon juice are boiling here. I did turn the heat up to medium as things got a little bit warmer, and this has taken almost 20 minutes. It's 12:19. It was noon when I switched it on. I'm going to put in a pat of butter. Whoops, get in there, pat of butter. I'm going to put in a pat of butter, and that will help keep the foam down. Okay, so I'll give that a stir. Let it melt. And I'm going to measure out my sugar. 7 cups of sugar, which you add all at once. You don't sprinkle it in, you dump it in all at once and give it a stir. So there we go, our butter's melting. That'll keep the foam down. And here comes the sugar. Okay, here comes 7 cups of sugar. There we go. Ooh, that smells really good between the strawberries and the little dot of butter. Okay, there's all the sugar. Now we're going to bring this to a boil again. And I think it boils for like at least a minute once it gets to a boil, okay? It's probably going to take, I'm going to say, at least 5 minutes for the sugar to dissolve and come to a boil. It's 12:21 right now, so we'll check back when it is actually boiling. The heat's at medium. In a nice heavy bottom pan, I'm going to give this a stir until it's all mixed through. Then it will dissolve, turn into like a kind of a syrup. Okay. And when all that process has occurred, it will be jam, and it will be ready to go into our hot sterilized jars. Okay. I'll time this. I'll let you know how long it takes to boil. Alrighty, this is the part where you want to move pretty much as quickly as you can to keep everything that's supposed to be hot. So I'm going to dump the water out of that jar. I like to set it in a bowl to catch the drips, because there, generally speaking, will be drips. I use my funnel, my tongs. This is a 4-ounce scoop, so it should take two scoops to fill a jar, roughly. Oh, no. I'm going to give that a little bit more. You want to leave about a 1/2 inch or so at the top of the jar to what is called headspace. And that's important. Headspace is important. There needs to be some air at the top of the jar, because you can't fill it right to the tippy top. Okay, a hot lid on our hot jar. The rubber has been softened. There's a tiny bit of air in there. That's called the headspace. Okay. Now when I put this into the boiling water, it's fingertip tight. It's not so tight that the rubber's sealed already. I'm going to put this into our boiling water, and the heat from the water is going to cause that air to expand. The air will extrude, it will come out. There needs to be enough softness to the rubber to let the air come out of the jar. It's called a hot water extrusion process. The heat of the jam and the heat of the water will force the air out. It'll process for 10 minutes. Let's see, it's 12:43. We're gonna let it about, by the time I'm done, I'll start the 10-minute timing when they're all done. You're gonna let the heat of the jam and the heat of the water forces the air out. You'll see little bubbles coming out of the jar as you're cooking. Then when your 10 minutes are up and you take the jar out of the pot and set it off to the side to cool, you'll very shortly hear a popping sound, and that is the lid snapping back down, concave, into place, which means that the softened rubber has allowed it to form a seal. The fingertip tight grip allows small amounts of air to extrude from the jar so that a vacuum can be formed. And when the jar begins to cool even slightly, you'll start to hear the lids pop down. Get on, there you go. Okay, and when you hear that popping sound, you know that the lid has sealed, and you've got a sealed, processed jar. You can be confident that there's no bacteria growing in the jar, and it's good on a shelf for months and months. I've even saved jam for a couple of years. I think the instructions on the box say a year, but we have definitely eaten jam that's more than a year old, without question. That can happen. Okay, wait, I can't get that one out, so that's when the tongs come in handy. Okay, dump the water. On with the funnel. We're going to fill our jar as quickly as we can, but we don't want to burn ourselves. Hot sugar is very, very hot. Very, very hot, maybe a little bit more than that. Okay, enough headspace to leave some air. Okay, we'll get a lid and a ring. The scary part is that I have been doing this for coming up on 40 years. Of course, when I was 8 years old, I wasn't processing the jars, but I was definitely cutting the fruit. My mom had me to work cutting fruit from a very early age and picking cherries and apples. So I've been doing this for almost 40 years, and it's still tricky. Like, it's still, you know, you want to move quickly. You don't want your order of operations to be incorrect. Everything has to be at the right temperature. You don't want your lids to be nesting over there, so that you can pull them out relatively easily. Look at that, eh? Doesn't that look beautiful? Ruby red. There's no food coloring in this. This is just the color God made strawberries. Just the color of red found in nature. Okay, so I think hopefully you've seen that enough. Okay, there we go. Into the processor. These are going to get processed for 10 minutes total. So the one that went in first is probably going to get a little bit longer than 10, but I would rather have it be a little longer than 10 than shorter than 10. There we go. This will be our last one, and then I'll do the rest. You don't need to watch me do all of them, but we're getting pretty close. I think we're on our 5th one already. Look how fast this is going. Okay, so we're on our 5th jar. I only heated 8 jars, so we're probably gonna, I've got more strawberries to process as well. I'll make a second batch. Okay, fingertip tight into the processor in the hot water bath. I see little bubbles coming out of the jar, so that means we're successfully extruding the air so that a vacuum can form. And I'll come back when I'm ready to get to the next step in the process. Okay, it's 12:52. I've got all of the jars in the water. The water is boiling. I'm going to give it 10 minutes. So at 1:02, out the jars will come. 10 minutes of processing in a hot water bath. Okay, we're going to tip all the water off the lid. Out they come. See a little bit of foam at the top there. And, oh, there goes a pop. There goes our first pop. I won't talk too much because maybe if the others are going to pop, you're going to hear them. So these are actually vacuum sealing themselves virtually immediately when they come out of the pan. Go. That's the heated air inside the jar contracting, popping down the rubber lined lid with it as it goes. There's a tiny baby one. Oh, double pop. I can hear the air hissing up. Oh, there you go. I talked right through it. Okay, so virtually every one of those jars sealed exactly as it was coming out of the pan. I'll let them cool a sec. I'll test. I'll touch the tops of each one to make sure that it's indented, convex. The button is down, and that means all that jam is sealed, and it can stay there for a year or more, and it will be delicious in recipes, in puddings, on toast, on pancakes and waffles, and in salad dressing. Anything that you need a combination of sugar and strawberries for, it will be ready to go.
I'm so sick of reality TV. I'm so tired of my girlfriend ignoring me. I sure could use a little bit of company, some time away from all the wannabe celebrities, 'cause I